In the Court of the Crimson King is among the greatest and most influential albums of all time, and often considered to be the first true progressive rock album. However, this album wouldn't have been near as impactful if it weren't for the compositions and performances by multi-instrumentalist Ian McDonald, a man that would go on to be a co-founder of the legendary rock group Foreigner and produced and performed on many projects over the years. Ian McDonald was born June 25, 1946 in Austerley, Middlesex, within Greater London. As a teenager, he got into the guitar, but took an unusual route to learning music and joined the British Army as a junior bandsman. He spent 5 years in the military and learned how to read music and play instruments such as clarinet, saxophone, and the flute. Some of McDonald's early influences were Louis Bellson, Les Paul, Earl Bostic, and classical composers like Stravinsky and Richard Strauss. In 1967, he formed a group called Infinity with his friend lyricist Pete Sinfield, and had also dabbled in dance bands and orchestras. The group Giles and Fripp had recently released their debut album and were looking to collaborate with a songwriting team. They found Ian's ad in Melody Maker magazine, and he and his girlfriend at the time, Fairport Convention's Judy Dybel, started to work with the group and introduced them to Pete Sinfield. You can hear demos of this 5-piece band do tracks like the McDonald and Sinfield classic I Talk to the Wind on the Bronsberry Tapes, 1968, which was released in 2001. Judy and Ian parted ways, and Peter Giles stepped away from the band, and he was replaced by Greg Lake, thus bringing us to the first formation of King Crimson. The band took their name from an epic song called The Court of the Crimson King. It had originally been a 3-chord folk song written by Pete Sinfield, but Ian threw away all of his music and crafted what is, in my opinion, one of the most progressive and awesome songs in the history of music still to this day. King Crimson's debut album was released on October 10th of 1969 and has a huge and unique sound to it, largely due to Ian McDonald overtracking layers of mellotron, harpsichord, and various woodwind and reed instruments. Right at the beginning of the album, we are introduced to Ian wailing on the saxophone with such powerful melody and tone that it's something that can't easily be overlooked and forgotten. King Crimson spent 11 days in the studio producing and mixing the album themselves. Though it was Ian's first time in the studio, he felt it very natural for him and he had a big role in the production on the album. Of course, it was a hit, but Ian wasn't thrilled with the darker direction that Robert Fripp wanted to take the band, and Michael Giles wasn't enjoying the stresses of touring, so after they finished the US tour in 1969, Michael and Ian left the band to form their own project. Of course, breakups are never totally clean, and though Ian does not perform on the second King Crimson album, he does have co-writer tracks for The Devil's Triangle and Cat Food. The album McDonald and Giles was released in November of 1970, and the long track Birdman contains a couple of minutes of music that King Crimson had previously played live. It seems that Pete Sinfield and Ian McDonald's song Cadence and Cascade got kind of ripped in half, as Robert Fripp wrote new music for it for the King Crimson version on In the Wake of Poseidon, and B.P. Fallon added new lyrics to Ian's original melody and called it Flight of the Ibis for the version heard on McDonald and Giles. I've always been a big fan of the McDonald and Giles album and always kind of saw it as King Crimson with the darker aspects removed. I very much enjoy the lighter atmosphere on this album while maintaining the excellent melodies and complex compositions by Ian McDonald, as well as the relentlessly awesome drumming by the underrated Michael Giles. Both of them sing on the record. Peter Giles played bass, Steve Winwood from Traffic guest stars on the first track, and Ian plays guitar, piano, organ, saxes, flute, clarinet, zither, and more. One of the songs is written by Michael Giles, while the others are all composed by Ian McDonald, and I couldn't recommend the album enough. The group unfortunately did not record a second album, and the first half... The group unfortunately did not record a second album, and in the first half of the 70s, Ian would produce... And the first half of the 70s saw Ian produce albums by other artists and make guest appearances on numerous songs. He was part of Keith Tippett's 50-piece jazz rock orchestra, and in June of 1971, he recorded on their album produced by Robert Fripp, Septober Energy. He played on records by Keith Christmas, Silverhead, Herbie Mann, Phil Manzarek, and contributed saxophones to the hit single Bang a Gong, Get It On by T-Rex. Some of the records he produced in this time include 1973's Canis Lupus by Derry Ways Wolf, 1975's Night on Bald Mountain by Fire Ballet, and Modern Masquerades by North Irish proggers Fripp. And he also helped with the 1973 original London cast recording of a stage play called Lonesome Stone. Ian performs on 2 tracks of King Crimson's 1974 album Red, and had been invited to join the successful new lineup. He and John Wetton were very excited about the rising future of King Crimson, but Robert Fripp suddenly put the band to rest. Ian moved to New York City, where he joined the session for Ian Lloyd's 1976 solo album, adding sax, flute, piano, and percussion. It was here that he would meet another out-of-place British rocker, Mick Jones. They hit it off, and Ian is remembered today as one of the co-founders of the rock band Foreigner. Ian performed rhythm guitar, keyboards, and backing vocals on the first 3 studio albums and 2 live albums by Foreigner. He had a big hand in the production and arrangement, but it was Mick Jones and Lou Gramm who were the primary composers of this band, and Ian would only contribute songwriting credits to 1 or 2 tracks per album. He had played some sax and flute in the early days of the band, but by their 3rd album, those elements were totally removed. That 3rd album didn't sell as well as the previous albums, and Ian McDonald and keyboardist Al Greenwood were removed from the band in hopes that they would do better as a 4-piece with Lou Gramm and Mick Jones taking full control of the band. In 1985, Ian McDonald produced and performed on a new wave album by Steve Taylor called On the Fritz, but other than that, he didn't seem very active during the 80s and the first half of the 90s. In 1996, he went on tour as part of a supergroup that Steve Hackett had put together that also featured John Wetton. Recordings from this tour were released in 1998 as the Tokyo Tapes, and the group performed Ian's classics The Court of the Crimson King and I Talk to the Wind, among songs from Steve and John's careers. Ian would go on to do guest performances on several of Steve Hackett's albums from 1996 to 2003. He contributed a couple of compositions to a 1998 Sega Saturn game called Watchin' Rotor, and he performs rhythm guitar on a cool harp cover of I Talk to the Wind on an album called Action Harp Playset from 1999. 1999 would also see the release of a solo album by Ian McDonald called Driver's Eyes. It took him time to find a label willing to fund the project, and eventually he made a deal with a Japanese company for release in Japan, and his buddy Steve Hackett released the album in the UK under his Camino Records label. The album was bootlegged in the United States, much to Ian's displeasure. He had a lot of material written, and some even partially recorded, and wanted to create an album that was truly about the music that flowed perfectly from beginning to end. He has a lot of guest stars on the album, and he didn't really want to be in the spotlight, though he does sing on more tracks than he had initially intended to. Ian wrote all of the bass lines himself, and plays his usual array of instruments, that being basically everything you can think of. Driver's Eyes has contributions from Lou Gramm, Michael Giles, Steve Hackett, Pete Sinfield, Gary Brooker, Peter Frampton, John Wetton, Ian Lloyd, and more. The 10th track, Demononde, only has 2 musicians on it, that being McDonald and Giles. Let There Be Light has Gary Brooker from Procol Harum singing lyrics by Sinfield over a dark atmosphere with a string section, and Ian provided clarinets, flutes, and synths. I've always been a big Steve Hackett fan, so I very much enjoyed his solo on the sing that Lou Gramm sings, Straight Back to You. In 2002, a bunch of King Crimson alumni formed the band 21st Century Schizoid Band. It included past King Crimson members Ian McDonald, Mel Collins, Peter Giles, Michael Giles, and future King Crimson member Jacko Jaksic. The band would perform songs from the first 4 King Crimson albums, as well as other songs from the band members' back catalogs, including, of course, tracks from McDonald and Giles. Michael Giles left the band in 2003 to be replaced by another ex-King Crimson drummer, Ian Wallace, and the band created 3 live albums and a studio album of old material before disbanding in 2006. During the last 20 years, Ian made guest performances on albums by Judy Dybel, Ian Wallace, and Jacko Jaksic, and he also appeared in a 2009 documentary about the Mellotron. He performed alongside Keith Emerson and Greg Lake in May 2010, and in 2011, John Wetton's band Asia released a live DVD with footage from 2009 in which Ian is a guest star. In 2011, he worked with the Frog and Peach Theater Company and provided compositions, guitar, and piano for some of their off-Broadway Shakespeare plays. The company's co-founder, Ted Zurkowski, was a singing guitarist, and he lived across the street from Ian in Manhattan. The two of them created an album called Bad Old World, which they released under the name Honey West in 2017. He was a fan of Ted's smart lyrics, as he had put it, and he was immensely proud of his son, Maxwell, who not only provided bass for 3 of the tracks, but made a really awesome music video for the song Dementia that they recorded in one take. And truly it is very impressive, and it's nice to know how happy and proud Ian was of the mark that he left on the world. It's a real shame that Ian lost his battle with cancer and left us on February 9th at the age of 75. He went peacefully, though, with his family at his side. I typically do mini documentaries on this channel about obscure bands that I don't want to be forgotten, and I know I'm going to be doing more videos about musicians' lives like this, assuming you guys liked this video. But it's a real shame that this had to be the inspiration for creating the Ian McDonald video this week. But, you know, I reflected back and at how really, if it weren't for Ian, I wouldn't have even created this channel in the first place, and we really need to pay him the respect that's due. And I'm hoping that, you know, I don't want this video to get 1 million likes or something. I just want, if somebody wants to know about Ian, that they can come here and they can learn about the other projects that he was on without having to scour the internet too much. We shouldn't just remember him for 1 or 2 of the things that he did, because he really contributed a lot to music, and we're so lucky that we had him. And I hope that the afterlife, whatever it may be, treats him pleasantly, and that we all keep singing in the court of the Crimson King, which I'm sure that we will. If you liked this video, please go ahead and smash the like button and leave a comment telling me what you think. Of course, we can honor him by listening and appreciating the music and sharing it with others, and we shouldn't be too bummed. We should remember how grateful we are to have Ian in our lives, even though we didn't get to personally meet him. He spoke to all of us directly in his own way. And thank you for that, Ian. Rest in peace, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Smash the like button if you did, and have a happy listening session.